Call the meeting to order. And we have currently 5 commissioners on Microsoft Teams. We'll probably have a few more join, I hope. We do know that we have 2 commissioners who are out of town, and so I would like a motion and a second to grant leaves of absence to Commissioners Lamb and Luther.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. And for all of our votes today, colleagues, we will do a roll call vote. So Pam, if you would call the roll.
Commissioners Adams?
Here.
Koba?
Aye.
Devon?
Here.
Johnson? Not present. Nemi? Not present. Samput?
Aye.
And Strader?
Aye.
Thank you.
So the motion to...
Commissioner Adams, did you vote in the affirmative for the
Aye.
granting the?
Yes.
Aye.
I'm learning the rules. Here. So.
Thank you so much. The A's go first, so that's a lot of pressure.
And that, it does. And we are so tough around here too. So yeah, pretty wicked. The motion carries. Thanks, everybody. All right, we'll go to our agenda items. And for our first action item, I'm going to call on Antoinette to introduce it.
Okay, thank you, Madam President. Good morning, Commissioners. So we're before you this morning with 2 agenda items and 3 action items for your consideration and approval. The first item is a reflection of the changes to the current budget, just to make sure that we stay in compliance with state budget law. And then the second item, 2 action items, request the Commission adopt the fiscal 24-25 budget, followed by the adoption of the ordinance to levy taxes for fiscal 24-25. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Melissa. She's going to walk you through both agenda items, and then we'll turn it back over to Madam President. Good morning, Sam.
Thank you, Antoinette. Thank you, Madam President and Commissioners. My name is Melissa Morris. I'm a manager for financial planning and analysis here at the Port, and my pronouns are she and her. The first agenda item requests your approval for adjustments to the appropriation levels for the current fiscal 23-24 budget. As we near the end of each fiscal year, we always review actual and anticipated expenditures relative to our appropriations levels. We've determined adjustments are needed in the general fund, the airport construction fund, and the airport revenue bond fund. These changes are detailed in exhibits A and B. And if you have those exhibits in front of you, exhibit B will be the easiest to follow along. For the general fund, we request the following changes: an increase to service reimbursements of $2 million for revised engineering support to PDX capital projects, an increase in marine expenses by $1 million to account for potential accruals related to the Portland Harbor Superfund environmental liabilities at Terminal 4, an increase in trade and economic development expenses by $800,000 to account for potential increases in utility expenses at Terminal 2, and an increase in the system development charges and other expenses by $225,000 to account for potential expenses related to insurance recoveries. For the airport construction fund, we request a decrease in transfers from other funds by $4,730,775 to account for the net impact of debt service changes in the airport revenue bond fund, and an increase in capital outlay of $100 million to account for timing of capital project expenditures, and an increase in service reimbursements of $2 million for engineering support for capital projects. Finally, in the airport revenue bond fund, we request an increase in debt service payments of $4,730,775 to correct for debt service requirements. The total budget for fiscal year 23-24 after these adjustments is approximately $3.1 billion. And at this time, staff requests approval of the executive director's recommendation.
Thank you, Melissa.
You're welcome.
Questions, commissioners? Commissioner Johnson, you've got to have a question. There it came. I knew it. I was reading your mind.
Sorry. So we just approved the budget. What changed in between now and when we just recently approved? I mean, these are pretty hefty numbers. How do we miss the mark on the original budget request?
Thank you, Commissioner, for that question. These are changes to the current fiscal year budget. So this is the budget that the Commission adopted last June at this time. And these are the changes that as the fiscal year has gone by, and as we're approaching the end, we realize we need to change to the current year. The budget that the Commission approved last month is actually the changes will be in the next agenda item.
Okay, so then that begs me the question of how do we miss the mark last year on the budget for this year?
So some of these changes are related to things that we didn't anticipate, right? That we couldn't have known a year ago. And so it's making changes to that statutory appropriation that we have to make sure that we don't have over expenditures in the year.
So what is our diligence around forecasting? Because I mean, in my mind, if you under forecast, that's just as bad as over forecasting. So what is our diligence around forecasting and managing unforeseen? Is there no contingency that we put in the budget for unforeseen circumstances? And I'm assuming these are just pop-ups, unforeseen things that are out of our control versus things that we may have just taken some risk on in a forecasted budget.
Hey, Commissioner Johnson, this is Fran Breeding here, just Director of Financial Planning and Analysis. I'll just say what you're seeing here is actually sort of probably we do quarterly forecast updates throughout the fiscal year that really only get shared internally and kind of reported out to our business line and executive team. And so I think within the process, commissioners generally kind of don't see those mechanisms. And so these things are things that we're actually reporting out on internally on a quarterly basis. You're unfortunately only seeing it when we're adjusting our appropriations levels at year end. So I'm not sure if that really helps answer the question. We are tracking these. This is really we're trying to adjust appropriations levels to comply with the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission and budget law. So we are tracking these. I will say, like with regards to just maybe to get a little more specific, like with regards to the T2 change, for example, where you're seeing an increase in utility costs. That's a new campus. We weren't necessarily anticipating when we adopted last year's budget that we would have a tenant who would be drawing that much in utility costs. So, tracking that, and we've adjusted for that in next year's budget. We do have reimbursements actually that aren't captured there. So it's a net, kind of net neutral change. Does that help at all?
Not so much.
Fran, I wonder if you can address the question around contingency.
Well, I mean, contingency, okay, so I mean, in terms of sort of what you're looking at now and in the exhibits that are before you, that's sort of our anticipated ending fund balance. And then most of the funds that you're looking at, that's where, if you make an adjustment here, it's going to come out of contingency. I think we don't really have a mechanism like in our operating budget the same way we do in the capital budget. You know how each capital project sort of has a contingency. We don't really do that per se on the operating budget with a lot of these line items. And we try to be conservative, but still accurate when we're forecasting operating expenditures and our Superfund liabilities. But at the end of the day, I mean, we have pretty volatile operations for our marine terminals, and things do fluctuate with volumes, Superfund is notoriously difficult to kind of estimate appropriations for, especially until we get to a time until we're able to like really estimate the anyway. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm really not answering your question, and I
Yeah.
wonder if it might. I wonder
Let me-
if it might
can
be
I-
worth just spending
let-
some time with.
Fran, let me
Go ahead.
step in here. Sam, I'm not gonna repeat what Melissa and Fran have communicated out. I think I'll ask a question just to make sure I'm understanding what your concern is, and then how we might be able to address that. Because you're asking the question for a reason, just to understand. My interpretation, if we set a budget and we've got, say, a handful of items here that we are reconciling that have fallen out of what we anticipated the budget to be, Fran is talking about the quarterly adjustments that we make to try and basically right-size the budget to reflect some of these circumstances where we're above what we budgeted. But I think I want to make sure that I'm understanding what this question may be leading to as we're making these adjustments, right?
So
Because
it's two.
you're
yeah,
going to
it's-
have that in any budget year, right?
Yeah, it's two questions. It's really what is our budget predictability process, and what do we expect year over year, from a contingency, which is kind of where Dan is going. Do we not set a contingency around the approved budget, which would be what I would have expected to see this year? That, if you had a $10 million budget and you set a 10% contingency, then your 10% contingency should cover these. I don't know if we do that or not. And then if we're having these kinds of adjustments or budget, volatility for this year, what is our process to get to some level of consistent budget predictability for the budget we just approved? So next year, this time, are we going to be back here again with you guys asking for the same kind of budget uppers again?
Yeah, no, fair question. No, we don't set, my understanding, we don't set the contingency in that way. And I will say what we could do on a more regular basis, because Fran referenced the Q1, where we'll make adjustments throughout the year to try and basically minimize the delta, right, in each of the budget accounts. But I think a reporting out on a more regular basis to you all throughout the year, so you can see those trends, probably would be warranted. In terms of the way I'm interpreting the question, in terms of understanding historically how we have been maybe either within 1%, 5%, or 10% of that budget swing, do we have do we have an indication as to what maybe that baseline or benchmark is? And I'm going to tell you, no, we do not. Right? We don't have that.
Okay, so we can keep it moving, but I guess the ultimate question is, if I just take the service reimbursements for, $2 million, how do I know that's the right number? I mean, how do you get there? I mean, if your trend over the first two quarters is you're running, $250,000 over, or $500,000 over, then maybe. But at the end of the day, are you going to come back in Q3 or Q4 and say, hey, we need another $1 million? What is the confidence level in these numbers? And is it based on some trend over the first two quarters?
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. Thank you. Yep.
Any other questions?
And thank you for the question, Sam.
So just so that I'm understanding this, it looks like we've got a variation of about a little under 6 million on about $500 million budget, which is sort of around 1.2, 1.3% on the expenditure. And it looks like on the capital side, we've got a variation of about 5 million on about $1 billion. Are these variations sort of within what we've seen in the past years, or are these kind of bigger swings than we had anticipated?
Yeah, so Commissioner Sampat, that was my futile attempt to respond to Sam's question earlier. And what we'd have to do is go back and take a look at those trends, and we can certainly come back and report out to you if, in fact, on average, we looked at it historical. Are we somewhere between, as you've characterized, maybe 1% of the overall operating budget? I don't know the answer to that right now, but we can certainly look at the past 5 budget cycles and give you a sense of what that is. I do want to caution, though, that we keep in mind that the last 4 years have been COVID, right? And so there has been a couple of budget years where it has been difficult to, almost like trying to catch a falling knife. Maybe that's not the right analogy. When we've gone from the 20 budget that was set, compared to the 21 and 22, given the volatility in employments, right? And I'm just looking back on, we're talking about the general fund now, but even on the airport side. So I won't say that the budget was in flux, it certainly wasn't, but we had to be much more vigilant about doing these quarterly adjustments because things were moving so quickly and so volatile with COVID. So I just want to caution that. I think what would be valuable, and I'll put this out here, is if we look at, as we've been doing with a number of our analysis, is what was happening historically pre-pandemic, then look at the budget timeframe within COVID and try to get maybe isolate COVID just a little bit to get some sense of what some of the adjustments that we've made every year, what that percentage range is. So that's one way that we could approach it.
And when you're forecasting 12 to 15 months in advance, a 1 to 2% variation on operating budgets is just, at least from what I've seen in other organizations, par for the course. So I think we should kind of set some benchmark as to how much the variation will be. And if there are exceptional items, then we can have a discussion on those.
Great. And we'll also take back the comment around contingency as well. Okay, so thank you for that.
Commissioner Adams, just checking in.
Yeah, so my question was in that line of discussion. I was hoping that when I have my training session, we could look at the statutory requirements for the budget review, because there may be wiggle room in there for contingencies that may take some of this, the tension in this discussion away.
Okay, any further questions? All right. If not, I would like a motion and a second for approval of the adjustments to the appropriation levels for fiscal year 23-24.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, Pam?
Commissioners Adams,
Aye.
Koba,
Aye.
Devon,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Nemi,
Aye.
Thumput,
Aye.
and Strader.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Thanks. All right. The next agenda item is the 24-25 budget. Melissa, we're back to you.
Thank you, Madam President. The second agenda item requests that the Commission adopt the fiscal 24-25 budget and ordinance number 483T levying property taxes in the Tri-County Port District. The budget submitted for adoption today contains changes from what the Commission approved in May and that the TSCC reviewed earlier this month. The changes are in the General Fund, the Airport Revenue Fund, the Bond Construction Fund, the Airport Construction Fund, Customer Facility Charge Fund, and Passenger Facility Charge Fund, and are detailed in Exhibits C, D, and E. And if you follow along in Exhibit C, that'll be easiest to follow my comments. In total, these adjustments represent an increase of approximately $24.6 million from the budget approved by the Commission in May. For operating revenues, the increase is $6,711,995 due to an increase in estimated enplanements, resulting in adjustments to parking and concessions revenues. For grants, interest, other income, there's an increase of $9,543,927 based on revisions to interest income and that increase in estimated enplanements, resulting in adjustments to customer facility charge and passenger facility charge revenues. For operating expenditures, there's a net decrease of $62,956, which is due to minor expense revisions and updates to our internal labor and burden rates. For capitalized labor, there's a decrease of $1,088,236 due to revised internal labor and burden rates. There's a transfers increase of $8,336,023 due to the net impact of changes between all funds. For debt service payments, we have a decrease of $52,800,000 due to revised estimates for navigation loans. And finally, the contingency increased by $68,030,642, reflecting the net impact of all of the changes I've reviewed. The total budget for fiscal 24-25 after these changes is approximately $3.8 billion. At this time, staff requests approval of the Executive Director's recommendation to adopt the fiscal 24-25 budget and enact ordinance for 83T.
Thank you, Melissa. So I am guessing there might be a little bit of confusion because we have a contingency line item here. Maybe you all could speak to that a little bit more given the conversation we just had.
I will take a first stab. So each of the funds individually have a contingency line, but I think the conversation earlier was about contingency for specific expenses. And so I think there's a distinction between those two. But as Fran offered, we could walk through that contingency discussion further if that would be helpful. But we do have a net adjustment to overall contingency from all of the adjustments that I provided. Talked through.
Yep, that's right.
Great.
Yeah, I don't know that I was advocating a line item contingency more so than an overarching contingency that would cover an overrun in any specific line item. So I think a contingency, the way it's applied here, would notionally be able to be applied to the previous discussion.
Great, thank you. Any other questions on the 24-25 budget? Right. Can I get a motion and a second to approve the Executive Director's recommendation and adoption of the fiscal year 24-25 budget?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Pam, roll call.
Commissioners Adams,
Aye.
Hoba,
Aye.
Devon,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Nemi,
Aye.
Samput,
Aye.
and Strader.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Thank you. And our final agenda item, action item, is to enact ordinance 483T. I'm going to ask Melissa to read the ordinance by title only.
Ordinance number 483T of the Port of Portland, an ordinance levying taxes to be collected in the fiscal year July 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025 upon the taxable property within the boundaries of the Port of Portland.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions? I don't see any. Can I have a motion and a second to enact ordinance 483T?
So moved.
Second.
Pam, roll call, please.
Commissioners Adams,
Aye.
Hoba,
Aye.
Devon,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Nemi, and Strader. Or I'm sorry,
Aye.
Sampat.
Aye.
Thank you.
And we had an aye from Strader, Commissioner Strader as well.
Correct, yes.
Great, thank you. Motion carries. That's everything on our agenda this morning. Commissioners, thank you for joining on our special commission, and go out and enjoy a beautiful day. Take care. The meeting's adjourned.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.